Hi guys, welcome back to our render setup workshop. My name is Hussein Meshaikhi and I hope that you are all doing well wherever you are. In this session we're going to be focusing on Global Illumination or GI. We are going to learn what it is and how we can work with it with vray. Okay, but before that I'm going to quickly recap what we have talked about so far. So we said that as 3D artists what we do is basically creating a 3D space or a 3D scene and then transforming it into a 2D image. Sometimes that 2D image could be a piece of video. It can be video, but not for us right now. Mostly for us it's a 2D image, and that process with which we transform the 3D space is called rendering. Now, the process of rendering involves a lot of calculations, and we will expand on that and we will talk about it in a few seconds. But mainly if I wanted to tell you how rendering works and if I wanted to give you some kind of real life example or a metaphor for how it actually works, I can say that we can just imagine this scenario. Let's say we have 3 different people and they are located in 3 different parts of the world. We have one in the middle, one in the left, and one in the right. The one on the right is a painter. The one on the right is a guy who's looking at some mountains and taking in the scene, looking at some beautiful scene. And the one in the middle is basically a reporter who asks the guy on the left who's looking at the mountains what he's seeing. Okay, so he collects some information and then he gives the information to the guy who is a painter, and that guy starts painting what the guy at the left was seeing. So basically the guy in the middle, who I said to be a reporter, is like vray. One of the most important things that the vray engine does is to collect information from our scene, and just like this example, it can collect a lot of information and then process that information to bring about a render. So the rendering process consists of different stages, and there are a lot of elements that the vray engine takes into consideration when it's collecting the relative information. And there are no orders, so I'm not writing these in order, but basically the information is related to the light, the shadows, the global illumination that we will talk about, reflections and refractions, and so on. And if you don't really know what reflection is, basically when you're standing in front of a mirror and you're seeing yourself, that's the kind of reflection. And refraction is when you are looking through a see-through material like a window glass, and what you see is basically refracted to some degree. So basically it's a very fairly complex process, and it has a lot of calculations before we can get a nice render. And vray is using state-of-the-art calculations to bring about the best renders possible. So the first thing that we need to calculate when we are calculating information, or vray is calculating information inside the scene, is basically the light. And it has different methods to calculate the information for our lighting. And the reason that light is very important for us is because without lights we would not have any scene. So regardless of whatever objects we have inside the scene, if we don't have proper lighting, none of that really matters. So calculating light correctly is very significant for us and for what we are doing as 3D artists. So let me give you a visual representation of what the info collection process that vray uses works. So basically we have a camera. The camera casts some rays into our scene. It hits some surfaces and it bounces in different directions. Some of these bounced rays will be going towards our source of light, and if they can reach our source of light, that means that that area is in direct line of sight with our source of light and can receive direct lighting from our source of light, and that means that that area is not a shadow area. So basically that's how we calculate the shadows with vray in our scene. So this area is not in shadow, but this other one, because the reflected ray cannot reach the source of light, it means it does not receive any light from our main source of light, so it must be in a shadow area. So basically this was a simple representation of how the vray engine works, and basically it's cast some shadow rays inside the scene, and we have some ray bounces, and that's how it works. It calculates the way the rays hit different surfaces and how they get reflected into other surfaces, and if they reach our main source of light or not. And it's a lot more complicated than that, but that could be a nice start for us to actually imagine how this fairly complicated process actually works, and it could, give us some hints when later on we are interfering with that process and maybe changing something about the setting. Now in this example we basically talked about how vray could potentially calculate the information or collect the information for the shadow areas, but it similarly uses the same methods to calculate how the light is reflected from some surfaces and how sometimes the light is refracted in some surfaces as well. For example, imagine a glass table, and basically the way the light is trapped inside that glass and the amount of light that gets through that glass, all of that is calculated with this method. Now let's talk about the same process inside this scene. Let's say we have some light that is coming through this scene from the glass window. It hits some surfaces. This is the first ray that gets inside, and then it just bounces around. Okay, so every time it hits the surface, it loses some of its energy until the energy is depleted completely, and then it stops basically bouncing around. So every time a ray of light hits something, it has a bounce in a certain direction. So let's say that we have this many bounces, and a couple of them are really important for us. So the first one is important, and the second one is also important. Okay, so the first one, as I said, is very important. The second one, this one, is really important too. This is the first bounce off of a surface. This is really important in our calculations as well. And then we have some other bounces that are less important. Okay, now this was a ray that was casted from the outside from a source of light. Now vray works similarly in that it just casts some rays from the camera that is inside the scene, and then it does a lot of calculations until it has enough information regarding the shadow areas, the reflections, the refractions, the light, everything that we talked about so far. So for example, let's say that we have a camera at the right side of our scene, and then it casts some rays towards this surface. Let's say we have a piece of mirror here. Okay, so the rays hit this mirror and basically something like this, and then they get reflected back. And from the calculations, vray determines that that must be a very reflective material, and it uses the information that is collected from that area, and after a lot of calculations it determines the amount of reflection that that material has, and basically gives us a render of a mirror that is reflecting something that is standing in front of it. Okay, so it's a very similar process with refraction as well, and that's basically how vray does ray tracing and works with ray tracing for us. Now obviously I'm oversimplifying things a little for us to be able to digest it more easily, and if you needed to, you can just watch this again. Now let's talk about this graphic. Now another thing that is really important is the number of rays that is casted into our scene from our camera. So basically the rule of the thumb is the more rays we have, the better quality image or render we will have, because the more rays that we cast into that scene, the more information we are able to collect. And the more information we have from a scene, obviously that will lead to a better quality render. Okay, so imagine the same scene here. Let's say we have a piece of mirror here, or any material, and we have some light that is bouncing around. We have basically millions of rays of light that is just being bounced around all the time. So if we have little, like 200 rays to collect that information, we would get a certain quality. But imagine we have 2000 rays that is casted into this scene from our camera to collect some information. Obviously we would have a better quality. So that's how it works. So the number of the rays is important. And next we should talk about what determines the number of rays that we cast into the scene. Well, in one word, our resolution. So basically, let's say we have a 10:10 resolution. We have 10 squares in each side, and our camera will send 100 rays into our scene, one for each pixel, and we get a certain quality. So the better the resolution, the more amount of rays that we will cast into the scene to collect information, and the better quality that we have. Simple, right? So that's how it actually works. So the resolution is in direct relation with the quality of our render, and it all starts with the amount of rays that the camera is sending into the scene. Let's say we have a resolution of 500 in 1200. Basically the camera needs to send 600,000 rays into the scene to calculate good enough amount of information for us to have a high quality render. Alright, now we have become more familiar with how V-Ray works and how the process of collecting information actually works, so we can start talking about global illumination a lot more easily. Let's go back to the same scene. We said that we have some lights coming through the glass window. It hits the surface and it bounces around. Now we have this first bounce off of this surface, and after this first bounce we have a lot of secondary bounces after that, which we call indirect light. Let's just call all of those secondary bounces indirect light. Okay, and basically what GI or global illumination achieves for us is calculating all these indirect bounces and indirect light that we have inside our scene. Okay, now you must have heard this from somebody before, that you should not wear black during summer. Now why do they say that? It's because when you are hit with the sunlight or the rays that are coming from the sun, a lot of those rays get absorbed by the piece of clothing that you are wearing that is black, because that color absorbs a lot of these rays, and those rays do not have a chance to get bounced off of your clothing. Now the same principle applies to interior design, and if we have walls that have like a dark tone, it doesn't matter if we are in a sunny neighborhood or we get a lot of sun and direct sunlight. Because our walls are dark, we do not have that many bounces of that light, and we do not have that much indirect light inside our house, and basically it's not that light. It's always kind of like shadowy and dark. However, if we are living in a house where we are not getting that much sunlight, if the walls are white and a lighter tone, that little light gets bounced around so many times that it just lights up the whole space for us. So that's basically why a lot of interior designers always advise people to have a lighter tone for their walls. Alright, so before we go inside 3ds Max and look at the same process, let's just recap. We have this ray coming from the outside, and then we have this primary bounce, and then secondary bounces after that. Let's see how that would work inside 3ds Max. So I'm gonna go back to this scene. You have the same scene as well, you can practice with it. I'm gonna hide these lights for now, we don't need them, and we only have this V-Ray sun that is giving us some direct light that is coming through this window here. Okay, so this is all the light that we are getting for now, and this is a direct ray that is coming from the V-Ray sun. I'm gonna go to render setup now. Let's just go to render setup, and I'm gonna show you something here. And here I'm gonna first change my resolution. I'm gonna like the proportions, and I'm gonna put 1500 for my width. Okay, and now I'm going to go to vray tab, and under global switches I can give an override MTL to the whole scene. So if I click on it and select clear, I can get rid of it, and if I open it up, you can see that it's this vray MTL right now. Now I push M on my keyboard, I get my material editor, I'm gonna create a new slate. And if you are not seeing this, it's because you are using the compact version, this one. You can change it into the slate one, which is a lot more easy to work with. Now I'm going to drag this material, instance copy, and I'm going to use this material, and I'm going to choose a white color, and I'm going to assign this material to the whole scene. I'm going to override the whole scene with this whitish material, okay? And I'm going to show you something with it. That's why I'm doing this. So basically, let's see. And I'm going to go to Global Illumination, GI, and we're going to talk about the primary engine and the secondary engine. But for now, I'm going to disable GI. So I'm going to uncheck this Enable GI box for now, and I'm going to click on Render. Let's see what happens. So basically, this is our render, and it's going to be materialized rather quickly. Let's see. I'm going to put it here. So this is our final render, okay? And as you can see, all we have here is this area that is getting light from our vray sun. So because we do not have any indirect light enabled, because we turned off GI, it's all we got, this area here. So we do not have any ray bouncing. So because we do not have any bounces of light, we do not have any indirect light, the whole area is kind of dark. And as you guessed it, it's just because we turned off GI. So this is basically what GI does. Let's enable GI, and I'm not going to change anything. I'm just going to enable it. And I'm just going to take another render in a couple of seconds, and we can just compare the differences that we would have with GI or indirect light inside the scene. We get all these reflections, all these ray bounces happening, and that's going to light up the whole scene. Okay, so just compare. Without GI, we only had this part light up, but with GI, let's see what happens. Okay, so you are seeing that the whole area is kind of getting a lot of light, and because we are using a white material to override the whole scene, it's just the effect is just exaggerated and the light is kind of intense. But you get the idea with GI working, because we get indirect light and a lot of light bounces, secondary bounces, the scene has a lot more light in it, okay? Now let's test something out. I'm gonna change the intensity of the vray sun, or the light that we are getting right now. I'm gonna try that render in a couple of seconds. So I'm gonna go to my source of light, which is this vray sun. I'm going to select it. I'm going to go to the intensity multiplier, and instead of 0.1, I'm going to use 0.01, 1/10 of that. I'm going to take another render, and you're going to see that because of that, because of the reduced intensity from the light that is coming inside, our scene will become a little bit darker. Okay, so let's just wait for this render to materialize, and you are starting to see that we are dealing with a darker scene now, because we kind of reduce the intensity of the coming light from our vray sun. See? Okay, so the whole area is kind of darker. And let me just try out something else. So I'm gonna put this back to 0.1. Instead, this time I'm gonna go to my material, to my override material. I'm gonna open up my material editor by pushing M on my keyboard, and I'm gonna change the color slightly. I'm gonna, instead of white, I'm gonna use a kind of darker tone, something like gray. Okay, and I'm gonna take another render, and I'm trying to show you what we talked about in theory in action. So you're starting to see that because the walls and the whole area is kind of dark in terms of tone, we get a lot less bounces of light, and basically we get a lot less indirect light, and that results in a darker area and this render that you're seeing right now. So again, Let me just go back to this vray sun. I'm gonna put the value of 2 for my intensity multiplier, and I'm gonna take another render, and this time we'll have more light in the scene. However, as I said before, using dark colors for the walls or the whole scene is not a good idea, because it traps the light inside the material and it doesn't allow the light to bounce around. Alright, let's go to render setup again and talk about GI. So basically inside GI we have two modes. We have advanced and default, and the advanced option gives us more options to work with. So in the previous versions of vray we even had some numbers that we can just change here, but for now we just get different methods. Let's talk about primary and the secondary engine. So basically when we get a ray coming in, we get our first bounce, which is this blue one, and after this blue one we get some other bounces. So the first one is calculated with the primary engine, and the next bounces after that are calculated with the secondary engine. That's basically the gist of it. So again, I'm going to show you what I mean. So we get this ray coming inside and it hits a surface, and we get so many bounces after that. It's not just one, we get a number of bounces after this, but all of these bounces are regarded as the first bounce. So we have a lot, but all of them are the first bounce, and after that we get these secondary bounces, which are blue right now. So the red ones are calculated with the primary engine, and the blue ones, the secondary bounces, are calculated with the secondary engine. That's how the primary and the secondary engine work inside vray. Okay, so it's not just one ray, it's a number of them. So let's go back to the render setup and let's try out something. And I'm gonna change these methods here. For now I'm gonna put brute force for primary engine, and secondary engine is light cache. I'm gonna go to this vray tab and I'm gonna select start IPR. If I select this option, click on this, I will get another render. And if you want to see the last render, you can just go and select this last VFB. If you do not see this bar, it's because it's not visible right now. You can right click anywhere here and enable vray toolbar, and then you can see it like this. So the last VFB, you can see the last render. Let's just take another render. Okay, so this time I'm going to change the material color slightly. I'm gonna put the same kind of gray, lighter gray for the material. Let's take another render and let's see what we get. It's gotta be a little bit more light, as you can see, because we changed the tone. Okay, now let's try something. I'm gonna disable the secondary engine. Okay, I'm gonna select irradiance map for the first one. For the second one I'm gonna select none. I'm not going to have any secondary engine working, and we're going to take another render and see what happens. Basically we will have less indirect light. Okay, and let's just see how that affects our render. Okay, so the secondary engine is disabled right now, and we will talk about the different methods in the future sessions. For now, let's just use this setting, and just you don't need to remember the steps that I'm taking. I'm gonna explain everything in the future sessions. Now, based on the new setting that we just chose and basically disabled the secondary engine, this time our render has to become a lot more dark. And let's just wait for the render to materials and see what we get. Now, this is what we got, and you can see that it's a lot darker than the previous one. Now, let's put the secondary engine on light cache. As you can see, we do not have any irradiance map for the secondary engine. We only have brute force and light cache. I'm gonna select light cache, take another render, and this time it's gotta be a lot lighter, more bright, because now we have the secondary engine working. So let's just wait for the second one and see what we get as the result. See, there, our secondary engine is working. We are calculating a lot more indirect light, and that results in a more brighter area or space. Okay, now let's try out something else. I'm gonna change the intensity of my vray sun, or you know what, on second thought I'm gonna use some of these lights here. So I'm gonna use these two on the left behind the windows. So I'm gonna select them, move them here, maybe change the angle a little bit, tilt them slightly like that, and put them there. and I'm gonna use one of these lights, maybe this one. Let's say this one. I'm gonna put this one here, and I'm gonna go to render again, take another render, and we're gonna learn about all these different buttons here. Don't worry about it. In the future sessions we will talk about the interactive render, all of these options. Let's wait for the render to finish, and I'm gonna have to make this source of light invisible. I'm gonna select it, go here and go to options and click on invisible so that we won't see it in our final render. Okay, let's see what we get now. And as you can see, we got rid of that source of light that was visible. All right, so let's go back to render setup. I'm going to talk about something else now. Another option that is useful to know: if you go to GI, you have this ambient occlusion option, and it's basically responsible for the shadows that you have in the corners, in the places that are kind of angled. So basically in those types of corners, the light is kind of trapped, and that just happens in real life as well, and it results in a kind of shadowy area, a little bit darker area, okay, in these kind of parts. So we call that ambient occlusion. We have them here as well, and it kind of makes your scene more realistic so that it resembles real life. So I'm gonna start working with this. I'm gonna put the primary engine on irradiance map, and I'm gonna put the secondary engine on light cache, and we will learn about all of that. I'm gonna change the width into 1800, and I'm gonna go to vray, put the type on bucket. Again, you're gonna learn all about these options, but not in this session, in the future ones. Okay, so let's go to GI. First we take a render without ambient occlusion, so I'm gonna have this unchecked, and then I'm gonna take a render. Okay, now we're going to compare this with the ambient occlusion checked in a couple of seconds and see how that basically elevates or changes our work. Alright, so this is our render, and we can just save it here. If you click on this basically left side button here, this one, if you click on it, you get this history tab. So you click on it, you get the history tab, and if you're not seeing anything inside of it, everything is grayed off, you go to options, VFB setting, and enable the history tab. Click on this box, check it, and you get all these different options. So basically you select a destination on your hard drive for the renders to be saved, and then you get some other setting, and if you enable autosave, all the renders will be automatically saved here. And I usually put this on autosave. It's a good option to enable. Okay, and then I can just save everything and close. So this first one, this is the one without ambient occlusion. I'm going to click on this button here. I'm going to make a copy of it, make a save out of it, and I'm going to create a name for it. Let's just right click on it and name it without ambient, which basically is without ambient occlusion. Okay, so this is going to be one of the renders to be compared. This is, for example, A, and let's take another render, this time with ambient occlusion checked. Go to GI, check ambient occlusion, and take another render. Okay, this is going to be the second one, B. Alright, I'm going to click on this teapot, and let's wait for the second one to materialize. And I personally recommend that you use ambient occlusion for your interior scenes or classic scenes, because it just gives a lot more realism to the whole scene, and it's a good option to enable. And we're going to compare everything in a second. So let's just wait for the render to finish. And now that we have the second render, we have A and B. One of them is without ambient occlusion, the other is with, and let's just compare them. Okay, so the one on the right, or B, is the one with ambient occlusion, and the one on the left is without. So as I'm moving from left to right, you can see that we are seeing more and more of the one without ambient occlusion, and frankly the one with ambient occlusion looks a lot more realistic and a lot better. A lot of people ask me, what can I do to make my renders look sharper and more realistic? And enabling ambient occlusion is usually on top of the list of the things to achieve that. So compare this part, for example, the furniture. You can see that with ambient occlusion, our shadows are a lot more attractive and more pronounced, and the lines are more visible, and everything is just more realistic and frankly just looks better. So let's just take a look at this other side of the scene, this plant here. See, everything is just more realistic. Look at the background, these lines, these arches here. So the shadows are a lot better. Okay. Another thing that we can control here is the ambient occlusion value. Now, again, I'm going to talk about the irradiance map, light cache, everything in the future sessions. But for now, if we change the intensity of ambient occlusion from 0.8 to another value like 2 and the radius, which is on 10, you can see the differences. So basically, let me just tell you what radius is. So what radius means is that when we have ambient occlusion, for example, in the first one, if we had like a value like 5, it would cover this area, but with the value of 10, it would cover a lot more area with ambient occlusion. So right now it's on 2 for intensity and 10 for radius, and I'm going to take another render and I'm going to compare the second render or the second one with the new setting for ambient occlusion with the previous ones, and it's going to give you a clue as to what type of numbers to use there. So I'm going to assign A and B to the new one, and first I'm going to compare it to the first one without ambient occlusion, and the results are going to be a lot more different. So just take a look at it for yourself. Just you can see that the second one with the new numbers looks a lot sharper. See, maybe a little too sharp, maybe a little too exaggerated, but you can see how much better it looks in terms of shadows, especially in the corners. And we can just compare this second one with the two new values with the previous one. Let's just do that. So you can see the differences clearly, and maybe 2 is too much, and maybe you can use 1.2 for the intensity. All right, so let's go back. Let's go do something else. I'm going to go back to global switches, and I'm going to get rid of the override material that we assigned this scene so that we could take a render with its original material. Okay, so we no longer have the override MTL of kind of grayish color, and I'm going to disable ambient occlusion, and I'm going to take a render with ambient occlusion disabled, and I'm going to take another render with ambient occlusion enabled, and I'm going to use an ambient occlusion intensity of 2, and I'm going to let you be the judge and see everything with original materials for yourself. Okay, so I'm going to do that quickly so that we could just save time. I'm going to take the two renders and I'm going to compare the results for you here. Okay, so let's just wait for the first one. All right, so we have the two renders available now. I'm going to start comparing them. One of them is A, one of them is B, with and without ambient occlusion. The ambient occlusion intensity is 2 for the one that uses ambient occlusion. Okay, let's just see everything for ourselves. So as I'm moving this line here, you can see that the one on the right has ambient occlusion, and we can see a lot more detail and a lot more attractive shadows with the one on the right, which is the B, which uses ambient occlusion. So basically ambient occlusion is a must. It's just an awesome feature that can add realism to our scene and gives us more attractive shadows and corners. But you got to be careful not to use a high intensity for it, because it will result in a lot of dark patches or spots in our scene, and that's something that we always want to avoid. Okay, all right, so hopefully with these two last renders you have a good idea of what ambient occlusion is and what it can achieve for your interior scenes. And with that, I'm going to conclude this session. I have provided this scene for you so you can just go inside, take different renders, practice for yourself, you know, change the ambient occlusion numbers until you get the results that you are looking for. In the next session, I'm going to talk about the different methods that our primary and secondary engine work. And I hope that you enjoyed this session, and I will see you in the next one.